like I said, the skills that you need are fairly straightforward. It's about analyzing an image and understanding what that image means, what that image indicates about the people who made it. And then along with that, you kind of need to know a lot of information about history in particular. That's the hard part. If you haven't studied history before, you have to pick up quite a bit of information about world history and geography to really understand what is going on in a particular time and place so that you can identify where the object you're looking at came from. Today, what we're going to talk about is exactly what is art exactly, and we'll be looking at that skill that you can develop, which is to say, analyzing something for the purpose of where it came from and who made it and why they made it and what we can find out about the world and history through analysis of that time and place that it was made. So I'm going to share my screen here. What is art exactly? Anybody go ahead and pop into the chat and tell me what exactly is art, what you think it might be. And if that's a hard question, then you can also ask yourself, what isn't art? If you ask yourself what isn't art, that may also draw some attention to what art is. Now, the way that I like to think about art and text is kind of as a wizard battle. On one side, you've got an attacking wizard. On the other side, you have a defending wizard. So in this case, my art that I'm making here, we can analyze it for purpose once it's finished. Who in this scenario of art is the attacking wizard? If you're thinking about art in general, who's the attacking wizard and who's the defending wizard? This wizard battle is present in literally all works of art. Who is the left attacking wizard? What does he represent in terms of art? What does the magic represent? And what does the defending wizard represent in terms of art? The left defending wizard would be the artist. This would be the viewer or audience. Very good, Andre. That's exactly what I'm talking about. And so we can analyze the artist sometimes. So for example, we know Vincent van Gogh is a depressed fellow who had a hard time with mental health issues. And we look at his art and then maybe we can say, oh, look, his mental health issues are present. Look how sad this painting is. These are the saddest sunflowers that I've ever seen. This is maybe a sign of his depression, maybe, but we don't really generally want to do that. There's a concept called the death of the artist, the death of the author, and we want to avoid analyzing the artist as much as possible when we're looking at the art itself. But in terms of art history, we can't not do that. We have to involve the circumstances of the art. When was it made? How was it made? What kind of things could we expect to find in that time period? What parts of the culture are influencing that? And then who was the intended audience? If we're looking at a big Greek or Roman temple, are we looking at it, should we be looking at it like we're from 2020? Or should we be looking at it like we're from 100 BCE? And who were the people who would have been looking at this and what would they likely have been taking away from it? And if we don't know who the audience would have been, we can actually infer who the audience might have been by looking at the art itself and what we know about sociology and those kinds of things. So in terms of art history, we always want to be thinking in terms of not only the art, but also who made it and who it was intended for. This is also called the Rhetorical Triangle. This is true of all artistic analysis, whether it's literature or art or anything. And so in our AP art history, what you really need to get practiced at is taking a work of art cold and then like, okay, what do I know about it? But what do I know about this specific work of art that I may have prepped for? But then also they'll give you new works of art based on what you already have studied, and you would have to be like, oh, this looks like it's from the impression, this looks like an impressionist painting. I know a different painting from this artist, and I know at that time these things were going on, etc., etc. And you need to be able to write about it and compare and contrast it with other works at that time. So we're going to practice just a little bit with this. This is the Stettle Lion. This is one of, if not the oldest work of art known to man, but it is made out of a mammoth tusk because it's something like 30,000 years old, which is incredibly old. So just if maybe you've seen this before, it's a fairly well-known artifact. What can just observing it, just by observing it with the knowledge that you have, looking at its, knowing that it's made out of a mammoth tusk, what can we say about the person or culture that produced this artifact? Just based on what you know, what might you be able to say about the people and time that produced this artifact? Okay, so Andre says probably a tribal group of people. Now, what makes you say it's tribal? Because it's a carving? Based on what we know, we might say that it's from a tribal culture. And because it's carved out of a bone, we know about that tribal cultures tend to use things that are made from, they find around them. The fact that it's a mammoth tusk, we definitely know that it's very, very old, since mammoths have been extinct for thousands upon thousands of years. What about the fact that, well, what does it look like? Is that what a lion looks like, for example? No, that is not what a lion looks like. Is that what a man looks like? No. We have a combination or a chimera of a man and a lion, something that doesn't exist in nature, which means we can infer that whoever made it is able to imagine things that do not exist in reality. And considering that this is quite old, we can then at least make the assumption that the human ability for imagination goes back at least that far, at least as far as this object, since this is something that they're creating that they didn't find in nature. That they had the tools to carve with some degree of skill. Certainly this would have been made with a stone tool. And that there was some, now why might they have carved it? There must have been some purpose. Now we do art all the time, but even when we doodle in our notebooks, we're doodling in our notebooks for a purpose. Maybe we're bored, or maybe, like for me, I pay attention better to a lecture when I can do something with my hands or something else with my brain. I can follow more closely when I'm drawing little geometric shapes, little figures in my notebook. Rather than taking notes, I actually do follow better along when I'm not paying direct attention to what's being said. Maybe this was carved by some boy who was bored at the campfire. We can't know for sure. We can kind of assume that it was for some sort of purpose, because they were constantly, hunting and gathering, as a hunter-gatherer does. They were constantly seeking food and protection, so there was less time for the kind of creative pursuits. There must have been some sort of purpose. Now, if we also go to Gobekli Tepe, which is another famous ancient site, we can make the same kind of assumptions. Why would a group of hunter-gatherers create a giant temple complex with no wheels, right? They're able to move giant stone objects, giant stone stelae or monolithic stones that they didn't have they had hardly any technology whatsoever other than stone tools and fire to be able to do that. They didn't even have pots, and yet they made this temple complex in Turkey, which another one of these things that you need to study for art history. And in that way, by observing the art And knowing the history, we can make comments about the society and the intention. This is likely some sort of religious artifact or some sort of talisman, perhaps, of some kind. So think for a second, why might you carve a human with a lion's head? What purpose, what benefit do you imagine they might think they would get from creating an image of a man with a lion's head? What do we associate lions with? What do you think of when you think of a lion? Strong, king of the jungle, so that those kinds of things. And that's likely what they thought of as well, that by creating an image of a man with a lion's head, perhaps the man who carried the object would gain the strength of a lion. This is possible. We will never know. It could have just been a bored child, but it's also equally as likely that it was part of some sort of ritual of granting male strength, male fertility. Especially because we have other evidence of the male fertility if I scroll down, which is almost certainly what it actually has to do with. Many cultures all over the world have fetishes for fertility due to the importance of fertility. So now let's change this around a little bit. Let's do a different image. We can do this not only with ancient pictures of fertility objects and whatnot, but we can do art analysis even today. This is art. Now, it is a McDonald's advertisement, but it's also art. So just take a moment to look at the image of the McDonald's advertisement. And I just want you to think, what can you say about the culture that produces it? Try to remove what you already know about the culture, what you already know about the circumstance, and just by observing the image, just the evidence that you can get from the image, what could you say about the culture that produces something like this? Imagine if you didn't know that McDonald's existed and you were not intimately familiar with even the angle of a line representing the McDonald's Corporation, the image of the McDonald's Corporation. Think about how much existing knowledge the McDonald's company knows that you have in order for this image to work as an advertisement. Now, if we're bopping along on the interstate and we see this billboard, we're going to know immediately, with almost no cognition necessary whatsoever, there's a McDonald's over there. There's a number of ways in which that works, in that, say, this arch, our brain completes this line, and it's also pointing to the left, but we also know what the McDonald's arch looks like, so we can mentally complete the image. And I would not be surprised if that M ends basically where the McDonald's is, in space and time. That would be, I wish I could see it, just to know, because I wouldn't be surprised if the bottom left-hand part of the M ends where the McDonald's actually is. It goes to the left. Now, the simplicity of the text in the image allows us to read it quickly and easily. And why would we maybe want to read it quickly and easily in this circumstance if we look at the context in which we find the artifact? Well, it's a billboard above a road, so it's intended to be read at speed where you're driving a large car, which, again, you could make another claim about the culture that made it, that they are expected to be on the road and traveling and needing to eat. Why didn't they eat before they left? Why are they eating now? Maybe there's a kind of a culture pressure to be on the road. I am bringing in some of my suppositions there, but it's not unreasonable to think that they would expect people to want to be hungry on the road based on this circumstance. Maybe they'd be on the road quite a bit. And if you looked at the context of, like an urban environment, you would see roads everywhere. And if you were an alien coming down from space, or, someone from the future who happens to uncover the remains of a modern American city, you'd be like, man, God, they built a lot of roads, didn't they? They sure must drive. And there's all these cars that we found everywhere. They had these personal automotive devices that they drove everywhere. This is the kind of thinking that we want to be able to do. And so that kind of analysis that we're doing with the Stettle Lion, or that we're doing with the McDonald's sign, is exactly what we would be doing with every single one of the 90 plus works of art that you need to study. But fortunately, if you can do that with the 90 plus works of art, you're kind of done with the art history stuff. In addition to the writing of the essay, being able to take what we've just done and to put it into words, that's it. So it takes a bit of time. You got a big old textbook with a lot of pictures in it, but once you learn the background, once you learn the periods and the regions and things along those lines, it's just a matter of kind of looking at some pretty pictures and thinking about them. It's one of the most pleasant cram sessions, I think, that there is in the AP curriculum, in my opinion. With that in mind, so thinking about the ideas that are connected with art, we'll come to the question of why is the Mona Lisa so famous? Like, so why is art art? What makes art art? What is it about the Mona Lisa that makes it famous? There are many different images that are of a woman who is smiling. Why is the Mona Lisa so famous? So I'll leave with that question. Like, based on that, what about the Mona Lisa, if we do the analysis here? I want to see what everybody's opinion would be about this. What would you actually say? What is the purpose of art? What is art? Well, art is the intention of a person to convey the emotion, or even just basically anything, so to speak, that a human being points at something and says, look at that. Look at that over there. Isn't that interesting? And another person looks where they're pointing and says, oh, that is interesting. Why did you point that out to me? Oh, well, look at this line and look at that line. An example I often use is if you were at a subway station in a busy city, like I live in Korea. I haven't been in the city for a little bit because I'm because of our current global circumstances. But if you go to a busy subway station in a busy major city, and you stand outside of a subway station, and say it's rush hour, and there's people constantly moving back and forth. If you were to stop suddenly and look straight up into the sky at nothing in particular, what would everybody around you do? I want you to imagine this scenario. What would happen if someone just stopped suddenly and looked straight up into the sky? They may get bumped into, but people are generally pretty good at avoiding stationary objects in that scenario. If you stopped outside of a busy subway station, you stopped and you looked straight up, many people would stop and they'd look straight up too. And if you did it for long enough, they might get even angry at you. If you're looking straight up and they stop and they look up, and maybe they'd go and they'd move on for a second, or they'd stop and they'd look up and they'd be like, what is he looking at? If you had enough people looking up, right, you get 2 or 3 people at a time, you could keep moving and other people would be responding to what those original people were looking at. So people are just looking up in the sky for no reason whatsoever, because you are not even there anymore. And like an echo, your original looking up echoes through everybody else. And so that even would be art, because you've created this motion, this effect on other people. And in much the same way, it is Leonardo da Vinci. This is a very good painting. There's nothing wrong with the Mona Lisa. It's not a bad painting. But look at this. Why are these people at the Louvre? Why did they come? Do you feel like they're so in love with the painting technique of Leonardo da Vinci that he's just the most amazing, that they would come and stand for like 3 hours during their vacation to come to this?
Don't think so.
Why are they there? They're there because the Mona Lisa is famous. A long time ago, someone said, the Mona Lisa is a pretty good example of Renaissance painting. Look at this. And someone else was like, that is a pretty good painting. And then enough people said it over time and it got used. It's so straightforward and simple. It's such a basic image of a woman on a page that it now just exists, much like people looking up into the sky, because it's famous because it's famous. It's famous because it is this example of art. People who don't even know anything about Leonardo da Vinci, people who don't know about oil painting or the Renaissance, they know what the Mona Lisa is. And if you ask someone, generally speaking, for an example of a work of art, the Mona Lisa has filled that symbolic role as a representation of the work of art, so that in many ways it's doubly symbolic. It represents this woman in Vinci, Italy, in the Renaissance, but it also represents the entirety of art itself. There's a movie called Equilibrium, that an action film that is very similar to, has elements similar to Fahrenheit 451, where science fiction guys burn art because they think the government thinks it's bad. And one of the art that they burn is the Mona Lisa, and it's to indicate, oh, they're destroying art. It's a simple shorthand symbolism for the destruction of art. So the Mona Lisa is famous because it's famous. It's the most famous painting in the world because it has been declared the most famous painting in the world, and it may never not be that, because attention is what creates meaning. When many people think that a particular image or series of lines or representation, a meme even, it becomes important. And so to answer that question, why is the Mona Lisa important? That is why.